everyone, welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. European integration remains a key and unchanging foreign policy priority of Ukraine, and further development and strengthening of relations between Ukraine and EU is based on the principles of political association and economic integration. The new cabinet of ministers and the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine cooperate closely in the prompt consideration and adoption as a matter of priority new European integration bills. To discuss this, we're joined in the studio today by Dmytro Kuleba. He's the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. Hello, and thank you for joining us.
Hello.
So at the beginning of September, you were in Brussels. And during this visit, you had a number of meetings with the European Commission. You discussed the issues of political dialogue, effective implementation of the association agreement, and financial cooperation as well. Do we have the results of those meetings as of now? Do we have agreements? Do we have any documents signed?
Well, we absolutely have results, but the time for signing documents has not come yet, because that was the working visit to actually introduce myself and the new priorities of the government when it comes to the European Union, and to meet my counterparts in Brussels to establish direct contacts, which we did. And we also agreed on the most, I think, important thing, on the vision for our future steps, which would be our joint undertakings and efforts to further advance Ukraine towards the European Union. Now we are at full swing, working to implement that vision and to keep integrating Ukraine into the EU.
Okay. You said that this was your working visit in order to introduce yourself and hold meetings with your counterparts and see who your counterparts are. What do European leaders think of the new Ukrainian government?
Well, they feel pretty optimistic. They think that based on the level of support this government enjoys in the country and the ambitious plan of reforms that was set by President Zelensky and Prime Minister Goncharuk, and the Verkhovna Rada that has clearly a vision for adoption of necessary legislation. All this causes optimism in Brussels, because there are many outstanding issues which need to be resolved, which were inherited from the past, but also there are new ambitions and new projects and new reforms which have to be introduced. So time will show how efficient we will be. But first weeks of the government, of the parliament, demonstrated there is a clear will to adopt legislation and to introduce reforms which bring Ukrainian economy closer to the EU economy.
You just mentioned that the new government has issues that need to be resolved, and those issues were inherited. Could you dwell a little bit more on that? What are those issues?
Well, absolutely. Some pieces of legislation that are being considered by the parliament now and are actually being adopted, they were already proposed some years ago, but they had stumbled in the parliament because of the vested interests and political, I would say, schemes which efficiently blocked them. This legislation, like on the authorized economic operators or those laws on customs, they are all branded as so-called European integration laws because they introduce EU rules and directives here in Ukraine, and they make our economic cooperation closer, and they actually integrate Ukrainian economy into the EU market. On a different track, the issue of unbundling Naftogaz had been on the table for years, but it's only this government that managed to adopt decisions and actually unbundle our main gas operator and therefore implement rules of the third energy package of the European Union in Ukraine. So all these kind of things which we inherited from our predecessors are now being resolved in a way that serves the purposes of the European integration of Ukraine.
Okay, let's talk about the Atlantic. Let's talk about the new national security strategy, which was supposed to be represented at the NATO headquarters that was mentioned by you in order to get Ukraine closer to NATO. The strategy was supposed to be represented in order to get recommendations on how to make the process of Ukraine getting closer to NATO and being accepted and integrated into NATO even faster. What is this strategy about, and what kind of recommendations are we expecting?
Well, indeed, this is one of the fundamental documents, and Ukraine does not have neither obligation nor a commitment to discuss this document with any foreign partner. But since we believe that NATO is our crucial partner and we want to establish a very deep dialogue and a very frank level of interaction with the alliance, we decided to discuss this document with them. We are now, but this is not the only issue that is on the table. We are talking about reinvigorating our cooperation with the alliance and first and foremost about more active introduction of NATO standards in Ukraine, in the defense and security sector of Ukraine. This is crucial. This is fundamental. You cannot integrate into NATO, you cannot cooperate with NATO if you do not efficiently introduce NATO standards into your own reality, into your security and defense sector.
That's quite logical.
Yeah, and that's what we are working on.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Ukraine's integration into the European Union. While being in New York at the UN General Assembly, President Zelensky said that Europe will not be safe until the war in Ukraine is over. Now, does Europe fully understand this threat?
Well, there is a clear understanding of the fact in EU countries that the war between Russia and Ukraine and the consequences of the Russian aggression against Ukraine is a pan-European issue. Because you cannot feel safe, and the EU countries bordering Ukraine cannot feel safe if there is a raging conflict. In a broader sense, we should not consider Europe as, we should not equalize Europe to EU. Europe in general is larger to the European Union, and there is a clear interest in having safe and prosperous Europe as a whole. And also a Europe that would be able to compete with other global powers like China and the United States in the world. And the EU naturally needs Ukraine in that as a part of a larger Europe. That's how we see the world, and that's why the war against Ukraine, the Russian war against Ukraine, is a pan-European issue.
Let's talk about what Donald Trump said at the UN General Assembly in New York as well. He said that the United States of America are not against providing Ukraine with additional, well, not additional, but is not against of continuing to provide financial aid to Ukraine, but European Union needs to pay its share as well. Does the new government agree? Does the new government feel that the leading European economic powers are not cooperating enough, are not taking part enough in the conflict in between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, if we talk about the European Union as a whole, the first thing that comes to my mind is actually the mechanism of sanctions, which were enacted at the EU level and which are being rolled over every 6 months. And this is a very important instrument to support Ukraine.
Is it being used, though?
Well, it is. We can always dwell about the efficiency of sanctions regime and of those EU companies which find ways to escape sanctions regime and do business with Russia. All these issues are on the agenda, and there is no need to hide them or to turn a blind eye on them. But as a system, as a matter of principle, sanction mechanism is important per se. And there is also a bilateral level. We should always recall that it was the position of Chancellor Merkel and Germany in general in 2014 and 15 that was crucial to mobilize EU countries in supporting Ukraine. And the role of France was also very important. Now, on the other hand, we should also be realistic and say that sometimes our interests do not fully coincide with interests of some of our partners. and Germany is building Nord Stream 2 with Russia,
Right.
and France is talking about the return of Russia to G7 and reestablishing it as G8. So the point here is simple. I mean, of course, we appreciate everything that has been done. We do believe that more can be done. And while we remain extremely grateful to the European Union and to leading EU capitals for supporting Ukraine,
Right.
it is natural that there will be some issues on which we will not agree.
Okay. Let's touch upon a little bit on the Hungarian issue. Ever since Volodymyr Zelensky got elected as the president of Ukraine, the government of Hungary has been sending clear signs that they're ready for a dialogue, right? And I have a quote by you here that goes like, I worked as an ambassador to the Council of Europe and was deeply immersed in Hungarian issue. To be honest, I do not see unsolvable problems there in Ukraine-Hungary relations, but the political will is needed to solve them. I can say that when President Zelensky was elected, we were talking with the Hungarians in Strasbourg, and they were sending clear signals of readiness for dialogue. Since the dialogue is possible, what further development of the situation do you see, since you are experienced in the field?
Well, the overall atmosphere of this administration, of the presidency of President Zelensky, is to solve problems and not to create them or to stumble upon them. So the idea is to approach first and foremost relations with our neighbors, Western neighbors, in that spirit. And we have already entered in dialogue with Poland, and we found some solutions which hopefully will resolve some of the issues we had with our neighbors. And the same goes for Hungary. There should be readiness from both sides, Ukraine and Hungary, to make compromises on the issue, which is fundamental for both sides. For Hungary, it's an issue of Hungarian community living in Ukraine, and for us, it's an issue of Ukrainian Hungarians, citizens of this country, living in this country and being part of it. We should resolve this situation in the spirit of compromise. I will not disclose, with your permission, where we stand on that, but we are working, of course, on what we can do and also on what we expect Hungary to do. So, but this is a two-way road, and it is totally unrealistic to expect that Ukraine will make all concessions and roll back to the situation that had preceded the current state of affairs. So I think if both sides demonstrate willingness and commitment to solve the problem, I do not see anything unresolvable. And I would like to reinstate that there is clearly a commitment from our side to find a solution.
Well, thank you so much for coming here and clarifying this all for us.
Thank you.
That was Dmytro Kuleba. He is the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. Thank you so much for watching Head to Head. Stay tuned with UATV for more.